Hey, what is good, everybody? This video right here is going to be 10 things that every producer needs to know. And most of it is going to be on the technical side of things, although there might be a tiny little bit of philosophical sprinkled in there. Number one is freeware. Nowadays, there is a ton of free resources available for music production. I'm not talking about pirated software or cracked copies or anything like that. I'm talking legitimate freeware. Even if you don't have a DAW, which DAW means digital audio workstation, such as Ableton, Logic, FL Studio, etc. Reaper is a really good free DAW. Traction 7 is a really good free DAW. And once you have that, there's a lot of great plugins and VSTs and instruments out there made by developers who decided to give it away. KVRaudio.com is a great site to browse. You can plug in your operating system, whether you're on Mac or PC, and check out all their free instruments and effects and all kinds of good stuff. So I wanted to put this one on the list to make sure that money wasn't getting in the way of you and your progress, because as long as you have a good laptop and a Wi-Fi connection, you're good to go. There is a ton of great stuff out there. I've done quite a few videos on free plugins, so I'll put some links down in the description and you can check some stuff out. Number two is knowing the difference between electronic music and live instruments. And to be clear, I'm not saying that there is always a separation between those two things, because obviously there's not. But for a long time, I wasn't getting the right advice and the right information that applied to exactly the kind of music I was trying to make. For instance, I might have been working on a dubstep track and I wanted to know about processing my drums and making a drum group for that specific type of music. And I might have ended up watching some 45-minute tutorial about some guy miking off a drum set and recording a drummer for a rock band or something, thinking that I'm just learning about compression in general. While there is some overlap between all that, and while there is going to be useful information to be had from a guy miking off a drum set and compressing it, it's different applications of different things. You need to know that compressing an electronic sequence drum beat is different than compressing a live drummer, and there's different reasons why it's even done. You also want to make sure you're not getting outdated advice. When I first started producing, I asked some guys that were a little bit older than me, and they're like, yeah, you got to go out and get this $800 preamp and get this and get that. And sometimes you can get the wrong advice. Put it like this: if you were going to look for an article about what kind of laptop to buy, you wouldn't want to read an article that was written in 2006. So you don't want your music advice and your production advice to be from 2006 either. Just remember that there's not a one-size-fits-all thing for all this when it comes to equipment, methods, software, advice, information, all of that stuff. Knowing the difference between electronic music and live instrumentation and how you go about achieving optimal results for both of these things is really important. Number three is knowing your genres. And this one expands on the last one in terms of certain techniques and methods to apply to specific situations. For instance, even in electronic music, things vary from genre to genre. If you're talking about house music with the 4-on-the-floor kick drum, if you mention side chaining, you're probably talking about that pulsating, breathing effect they put on the synths that is very noticeable. But in dubstep, if you mention side chaining, you're probably talking about ducking your sub bass under your kick drum a little bit in a very sneaky and unnoticeable kind of way. So things vary from style to style. So you always want to make sure you're applying the proper technique to the certain desired result that you're after. Number four is proper A-Bing. And to A-B something just means to compare and contrast two things. The number one rule is to have everything at the exact same volume. Because anytime you're comparing two different mix downs, let's say you have your song that you mix down and you've selected one of your favorite songs by one of your favorite producers, and you want to see how they compare with each other. There's a trick your brain will do where whichever one sounds louder to you, you're going to think that that one is the better one. You're always going to choose the louder one. You're going to think that's the one that's more exciting and has more energy and is mastered better and blah, blah, blah. And a lot of times that's not the case. So this applies to plugins and effects and distortion and all that stuff too. Anytime you're sitting there turning a plugin off and on, maybe you've added an effect to a synth or something, and you're sitting there clicking it off and on to see which one sounds better, you got to make sure that both options are being heard at the same volume, because your brain is always going to choose the louder one. This is also a really good thing to do with your master and your pre-master, and this is something that a lot of people never do. Because if you have a mastering chain on your pre-master, usually when you turn it off and on and A/B it, it's way louder with the mastering chain on, because that's part of what mastering is. So sometimes take your mastered song and take your pre-mastered song, open up a new project file, turn the master down to where it sounds even with the pre-master, and compare those two. And then you're going to get a true comparison. Number 5 is super simple. You need to have some flat studio headphones. What that means is don't use recreational style headphones to mix music, because a lot of headphones have boosted bass and all these enhanced, excited sounds because they want you to put the headphones on and lose your mind. Studio headphones are really flat. There's not a lot of bass. There's not a lot of treble. They sound really kind of boring and lifeless, and that is good because you're hearing the true mix. You're hearing the actual music, and you can make the best decisions that way. And you don't have to spend thousands of dollars either. I use the Beyerdynamic DT 770 Pros. I think they're about $200. And this is actually my second pair. I love these so much. When my first ones died, I immediately went out and bought a second pair. You just have to have flat studio headphones and make sure you're not mixing on any kind of headphones that have some kind of augmented bass boost going on, because that's really going to screw up your decision-making process. Number 6 is using spectrum analyzers. These are tools that you can put on your master or on a separate channel to see what the audio is doing visually. You can see the frequency range information and where the treble and bass are peaking and dipping. There is a spectrum analyzer in Ableton. There's also Voxingo Span, which is a free one that you can use in any DAW. A really good exercise is to take all your favorite songs by all your favorite producers, put them into your DAW, and while you're listening to them, watch them on a spectrum analyzer, and you're going to start to see patterns and similarities from song to song. And while mixing is all about using your ears, these analyzers are your friends too. And you're going to start to see what you're going for as well as hear it. Number 7 is gain staging. And this is something that takes some time to really delve into. But on a basic level, what gain staging means is you're going to have volume controls in several different places. If you have a channel pulled up in your DAW and you have a synth pulled up onto that channel, that synthesizer has a volume. Your channel has a volume. There's also the master volume on your DAW. And gain staging means paying attention to what all these volumes are set at, and make sure you're not pushing or clipping one of them really hard while having another one turned way down. If I have like a sample from Splice that I pull into my DAW, these samples are usually really loud. They usually hit at -1 dB, which is almost clipping. So right off the bat, when I drag this sample into my DAW, it's already pushing that part of the chain to the max. So instead of turning my channel volume down, I'm going to leave it at 0, and I'm going to click on the actual audio piece, and I'm going to bring that down. And that's just a habit I have. Every time I pull up a piece of audio, if it's great big and loud and almost at zero, I turn that piece down rather than the channel. And that's going to keep my gain staging nice and clean and sounding good. Number 8 is creating movement. And that means several different things. When I first started making beats on a computer, I was trying to make these like soulful tracks with emotion, and they sounded flatline to me. It sounded like a video game, and I didn't understand why. And what they lacked was movement. And that basically just means fluctuation in volume and maybe filters, things opening and closing, things moving back and forth from left to right in the stereo field. These things are going to make your song sound alive and like they're pulsating and breathing. The simplest example of this would be like, say you had a hi-hat, and even if you made every other hi-hat a little bit quieter to where it was going tss, 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 that's creating movement. Use auto pan on your hi-hats. Use filters on your synths. Make things open up and close. That's going to create some excitement in your song and some life and make it sound less flatline and dead. Number 9 is keeping your sub bass on a separate channel. This is something I go into more in depth on a different video, and I'll link that in the description also. But the general idea is, let's say you have a bass line, copy those MIDI notes onto a new MIDI track and apply a clean sub bass to those secondary MIDI notes. And then on the original main part of the bass, roll the low end off to around 90 or 100 hertz. And then on that sub bass, do the opposite. Now you have a nice clean sub bass on one channel and then the main portion of the bass on another channel. And it just gives you more control. Sometimes you just want to turn the sub up or down a little bit. It also allows you to process just the top end of the bass, like maybe you wanted to add a stereo widener or some other effects. And you can add these things to the main portion of the bass, but all the while you have a separate clean sub on its own track being unaffected by all that processing. And that'll always keep your low end clean and hitting hard because it's not being affected by anything you might be doing to the main part of the bass. And finally, number 10, keep your creativity your number 1 priority. Nowadays, producers are wearing a lot of different hats. We are songwriting and composing, and then we're doing the mix down, and then we're doing our own mastering, and that's a lot of different things. And I think it's good to separate these tasks in your mind and kind of compartmentalize them a little bit. And when you're feeling inspired about a chord progression or a melody or a song or any of that, stick to that. Try not to put on your producer hat until all that is already done. Because I developed a bad habit of sort of jumping all over the place. And I would come up with a melody, but then I would just sit there and work on that patch for 45 minutes. And by the time I got the patch sounding the way I wanted it to sound, the initial inspiration for the song was kind of gone at that point. So do songwriting and composition and let it just be that. And then once you have something, then switch to production mode and mixing and mastering and all that stuff. And I think that'll help you out tremendously. Thank you very much for watching this video. Let me know if you have any questions or anything you want to say in the comments. Hit that subscribe button and peace.